Imagine living in a land where each dawn brings not the hope of a new day, but the constant fear of invasions and losses. For 7 long years, this was the reality for the people of Israel. The Midianites, a nomadic and warrior people, swept across the land like a swarm of locusts, destroying everything in their path. They not only plundered the harvests and stole livestock, but also devastated villages, leaving a trail of destruction and despair. The Israelite families worked hard, plowing the land and planting seeds with the hope of a harvest that would sustain their homes. However, as soon as the first fruits appeared, the Midianites descended from the hills with their swift camels, taking everything they found. Imagine the frustration of planting without harvesting, of caring for livestock only to see it taken by enemy hands. Nights were even more feared. The silence was broken by the distant sound of drums and the glow of enemy fires on the horizon. Children asked their parents why they needed to hide, and the answers came laden with sadness and helplessness. Many Israelites took refuge in caves and makeshift fortifications in the mountains, trying to escape the Midianite fury. Hunger began to spread. Without harvests and livestock, tables remained empty. What was once a land of abundance now seemed a desert of hope. The elders remembered the times when God had blessed them, but these stories seemed like distant tales to the new generations. Amidst this desolate scene, the people's hearts filled with anguish. They began to realize that they had strayed from the ways of the Lord, following other gods and forgetting the divine promises. The oppression of the Midianites served as a mirror, reflecting their own failings and the need to return to faith. In an act of desperation and repentance, the people of Israel united in a sincere cry to the Lord. Gathered in small groups, in hidden houses or around discreet fires, they raised their voices in prayer. They asked for forgiveness for their mistakes, pleaded for mercy, and begged for deliverance. Tears streamed down faces marked by suffering, and the whispers of prayers echoed in the silent mountains. This cry did not go unnoticed. The God of their ancestors heard the call of his people. Although they had strayed, he remained faithful, waiting for the moment they would seek his help again. The oppression of the Midianites had prepared the heart of Israel for transformation, and God was about to act in a way no one could have predicted. While the Midianites continued to believe in their invincibility, God planned the liberation of Israel through someone unlikely. The story was about to change, and the darkness of those 7 years would be broken by the light of hope and redemption. In this first part of the story, we see how the people of Israel faced extremely difficult times under the oppression of the Midianites. The narrative engages us by showing the suffering daily life of families, the loss of harvests, and the hopelessness that took hold of everyone. But at the same time, we perceive the beginning of a change, driven by the recognition of their failings and the sincere cry to the Lord. This is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always a chance for redemption when we seek divine help. If you feel motivated and inspired by this content, make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss more videos like this. We will bring a series of content with biblical teachings and inspiring stories that motivate us to continue, that do not let us give up. Let's continue with the story. Amid the chaos and oppression of the Midianites, there was a young man named Gideon. He was not known for his bravery or leadership. In fact, Gideon was shy and full of self-doubt. His family belonged to the clan of Abiezer, of the tribe of Manasseh, considered one of the smallest in Israel. Gideon saw himself as the least important in his father's house and carried the weight of insecurity. One afternoon, Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress. Now you might wonder, why would someone thresh wheat in a winepress, which is used for stomping grapes? The answer lies in fear. Gideon did this to hide the wheat from the Midianites, who regularly plundered the Israelite harvests. Working in the winepress, he hoped to go unnoticed, protecting the little his family had to survive. While he worked, focused on separating the grain from the chaff, an unexpected presence appeared. The angel of the Lord appeared and sat under the oak near the winepress. Gideon, absorbed in his thoughts and tasks, did not immediately notice the divine presence. Then the angel of the Lord greeted him. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon looked up, surprised by the greeting. "Pardon me, my lord," he replied humbly, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all the wonders our fathers told us about when they said, 'The Lord brought us out of Egypt'? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over into the hands of Midian." The angel looked directly into Gideon's eyes and said firmly, "Go in the strength you have and deliver Israel from the hands of the Midianites. Am I not the one sending you?" Gideon's heart raced. Deliver Israel? Him? How could someone so insignificant accomplish such a feat? "Ah, Lord," he replied, almost whispering, "how can I save Israel? My clan is the least important of Manasseh, and I am the smallest in my father's house." But the Lord assured him, "I will be with you, and you will defeat all the Midianites as if they were one man." Even in the face of this promise, Gideon's doubts persisted. He needed confirmation, a sign that it was truly God speaking to him. Respectfully, he asked, "If I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is you speaking with me. Please do not go until I return and bring my offering and place it before you." "I will wait until you return," replied the angel. Gideon then ran home. He prepared a kid and made unleavened bread with about 10 kilos of flour. He placed the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot and took everything to the oak where the angel was waiting. The angel of the Lord said to him, "Place the meat and unleavened bread on this rock and pour out the broth." Gideon did as he was instructed. Then, something incredible happened. The angel extended the tip of the staff in his hand and touched the meat and bread. Immediately, fire rose from the rock and consumed the entire offering. At that moment, the angel of the Lord disappeared from his sight. Gideon was astonished. Realizing he had been in the divine presence filled him with fear. "Ah, sovereign Lord," he exclaimed, "I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord reassured him, speaking to his heart, "Peace be with you. Do not be afraid. You will not die." With his heart still pounding, Gideon built an altar to the Lord in that place and called it, "The Lord is Peace." From that moment on, despite his insecurities, he began to understand that God had a purpose for him. Gideon would still face many challenges and ask for more signs, but this encounter marked the beginning of his transformation from a shy young man into a courageous leader. The mission given to him would not be easy. He would have to confront not only external enemies but also internal doubts and the idolatry present in his own community. However, with the certainty that God was by his side, Gideon took the first step toward the liberation of Israel. In this part of the story, we see how God chose someone who, in human eyes, seemed unsuitable for a great mission. Gideon, even feeling small and insufficient, was called to be the liberator of his people. The narrative engages us by showing his emotions, his doubts, and the transformative encounter with the angel of the Lord. It is a powerful reminder that, regardless of our limitations, we can be instruments in God's hands when we trust in his direction. After his transformative encounter with the angel of the Lord, Gideon began to understand the magnitude of the mission entrusted to him. However, before facing external enemies, there was an internal battle to be fought, the purification of idolatry within his own home and community. That silent night, while the stars shone in the sky, Gideon was at home, reflecting on everything that had happened. Suddenly, the Lord spoke to him again, this time with a clear and challenging instruction. "Take the second bull from your father's flock, the one 7 years old. Destroy the altar of Baal that belongs to your father and cut down the sacred Asherah pole beside it. Then, build a proper altar to the Lord your God on top of this hill. Offer the second bull as a burnt offering with the wood from the sacred Asherah pole you will cut down." Gideon felt a chill run down his spine. Destroy the altar of Baal? The altar that belonged to his own family? He knew this would not be well received by the town's inhabitants, not even by his relatives. Baal and Asherah were gods worshipped by many in Israel at that time, and their altars were considered sacred by those who had turned away from the ways of the Lord. Aware of the risks but determined to obey, Gideon decided to act. He called 10 of his trusted servants and shared the plan. They looked at him in astonishment, but seeing the conviction in Gideon's eyes, they agreed to help him. However, because of fear of his family and the men of the town, they decided to carry out the task at night, under the cover of darkness. Silently, the group made their way to the location where the altar of Baal stood, imposing against the night sky. The sacred Asherah pole swayed gently in the breeze. With tools in hand, they began to tear down the altar. Each blow echoed in the silence, their hearts pounding, fearing they might be discovered at any moment. The bull was brought, and Gideon built a new altar, dedicated to the Lord, on top of the hill. Using the wood from the sacred Asherah pole they had cut down, he prepared the burnt offering as God had instructed. When the first ray of sun began to appear on the horizon, Gideon and his servants had already completed the mission and returned to their homes, awaiting what would come next. The next morning, the town awoke to a shocking scene. The altar of Baal was in ruins, the sacred Asherah pole had been cut down, and a new altar stood in its place with the remains of the sacrifice still smoking. Murmurs of astonishment and indignation quickly spread. "Who did this?" they asked each other, gathering around the desecrated site. After investigating and talking among themselves, it did not take long for them to discover that Gideon, son of Joash, was responsible. Fury took hold of the men of the town. They organized and went to Josh's house, demanding justice. "Bring your son out," they insisted. "He must die for destroying the altar of Baal and tearing down the sacred Asherah pole." Joash, Gideon's father, went out to confront the enraged crowd. Although he knew what his son had done, something changed in his heart. Perhaps he saw the truth in Gideon's actions or recognized the futility of worshipping false gods. With courage, he faced the men and said, "Are you defending Baal? Do you want to save him? Whoever fights for him will be killed by morning. If Baal is truly a god, he himself will defend his cause, seeing that someone has torn down his altar." Josh's words surprised the crowd. If Baal were so powerful, why would he need men to defend him? Slowly, the anger began to subside, giving way to reflection. From that day forward, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, meaning "let Baal contend against him," for he had challenged the false god. This event marked a turning point in Gideon's life. By confronting idolatry in his own home, he not only obeyed God but also began to gain confidence in his mission. Defending his father strengthened his position before the community, and many began to respect him for his courage. Moreover, the destruction of the altar of Baal sent a powerful message to all of Israel. It showed that the gods they were worshipping had no real power and that it was time to return to the Lord, the God of their ancestors. Gideon's courage inspired others to reconsider their own practices and question the validity of the idolatry that had spread throughout the country. While the Midianites and other peoples prepared for another attack on Israel, something was changing internally. The people began to awaken from their spiritual slumber, and Gideon was at the center of this transformation. He would still face enormous challenges, but now, with growing confidence in God and himself, he was better prepared to lead Israel toward liberation. In this part of the story, we follow Gideon's bold action in destroying the altar of Baal, a crucial step in his journey. The narrative highlights the conflict between true worship of the Lord and the idolatry that had taken hold of Israel. Gideon's courage in facing not only external enemies but also his people's misguided traditions serves as a powerful example of faith and obedience. It is a reminder that sometimes, challenging the status quo is necessary to promote significant changes, and that, with God's help, we can overcome our fears and positively influence those around us. Do you feel any similarity between the moment you live in and the story told? Do you feel you are experiencing something similar? Tell us how you feel. If you need a prayer or help, share a story of overcoming to inspire us and give us strength not to give up. Comment if you want to help someone or need help. After the bold destruction of the altar of Baal and the growing support of the people, Gideon began to gather an army to face the Midianites. However, even with these initial victories, he still struggled with deep insecurities. The responsibility of leading Israel against such a powerful enemy weighed heavily on his shoulders. At night, as he looked at the stars, he questioned whether he was truly chosen for this grand mission. Once, while the camp was resting, Gideon quietly stepped away. The night wind blew softly, bringing with it the distant sounds of the Midianite camps. Sitting on a hill, he prayed, "Lord, I know you called me to deliver Israel, but I still have doubts. I need a sign, something to confirm that you are with me in this battle." With this need for confirmation in his heart, Gideon had an idea. He returned to the camp and took a woolen veil, soft and fluffy, taken from his flock's sheep. He placed it on the threshing floor, a place where cereals were threshed, exposed to the open sky. He then prayed again, "O God, if you truly are going to use me to save Israel, as you promised, I ask you for a sign. I will perform this test. I will place this woolen veil on the threshing floor. If in the morning the veil is wet with dew, but the entire ground around it is dry, then I will know that you will save me from the hands of the Midianites." With an anxious heart, Gideon withdrew to rest. The night seemed long, each minute dragging as he waited for dawn. Finally, the first rays of sun appeared on the horizon. Quickly rising, he headed to the threshing floor. Upon arrival, he observed that the ground around the veil was completely dry. Not a single drop of dew shimmered on the earth. With anticipation, he reached out and touched the woolen veil. It was soaked. When he squeezed the veil, he managed to fill an entire bowl with the dew water. It was a clear and undeniable sign that God was with him. However, even in the face of this miracle, Gideon still felt a lingering doubt. Perhaps he thought it could have been a coincidence. So humbly, he asked God for one more sign. "Do not be angry with me, Lord, but allow me to make just one more request." This time, let the veil remain dry and the ground around it be covered with dew. Once again, he placed the veil on the threshing floor and waited for the night. The silence was broken only by the sound of crickets and the whisper of the wind. Gideon knew he was asking much, but he needed this final confirmation to strengthen his faith. At dawn, he rushed to the site. This time, the ground was wet, glistening with dewdrops that reflected the rising sun's light. Taking a deep breath, he touched the woolen veil. It was dry. Not a single drop of moisture touched it. It was the second sign, the confirmation Gideon had been seeking. With a heart full of confidence, Gideon thanked God. His doubts were replaced by unwavering certainty. Now, he was convinced that he was not alone and that the Lord had truly chosen him to lead Israel to victory. Upon returning to the camp, he shared with his men what had happened. The news of the signs with the woolen veil spread quickly, strengthening not only Gideon's faith but also that of the entire army. The soldiers felt encouraged, knowing that God was by their side. This moment was crucial in Gideon's journey. The signs with the woolen veil were not just tests but demonstrations of God's patience and mercy. He understood that even amidst his insecurities, he could fully trust in the Lord. From then on, Gideon was ready to face the challenges that would come. He knew that with God by his side, no obstacle was too great. The story of the signs with the woolen veil became a powerful testimony of divine faithfulness and the importance of seeking confirmation in moments of doubt. In this part of the story, we see Gideon seeking certainty amidst his insecurities. The narrative shows us that it is natural to have doubts, but we can find answers when we turn to God sincerely. The signs with the woolen veil serve as a reminder that the Lord is willing to give us the confirmation we need to move forward with courage and confidence. After receiving confirmation from God through the signs with the woolen veil, Gideon was ready to face the Midianites. With renewed courage, he blew the trumpet, calling men from all neighboring tribes, Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. The news spread quickly, and brave men began to arrive from all directions. In a short time, an army of 32,000 soldiers had gathered, ready for battle. Gideon's camp buzzed with activity. The soldiers sharpened their swords, adjusted their armor, and shared stories around the fires. There was a mix of anxiety and determination in the air. Although they knew the enemy army was numerous, they were ready to fight for Israel's freedom. However, one night, God spoke to Gideon with a surprising message. "You have too many people for me to deliver Midian into your hands. If you win with this army, Israel can boast and say that the victory came by your own strength, not by my help." Gideon was surprised. "What do you mean, too many people?" The Midianites and their allies were like a swarm of locusts covering the valley, with camels more numerous than the grains of sand on the beach. Even with 32,000 men, the battle already seemed challenging. But Gideon trusted God and was willing to obey. Then God instructed, "Announce to the people, whoever is fearful or trembling with fear may return home." The next morning, Gideon gathered his troops. With a firm yet understanding voice, he proclaimed, "Whoever is fearful or feels insecure is free to return home without judgment or shame." There was a momentary silence, followed by whispers among the men. Some soldiers looked at the ground, others exchanged worried glances. Gradually, groups of men began to step away. In the end, 22,000 soldiers returned to their homes, leaving Gideon with only 10,000 men. Despite the drastic reduction, Gideon believed that with 10,000 soldiers, he could still face the enemy. But God had other plans. He spoke to Gideon again, "There are still too many people. Lead the men to the water, and there I will separate them for you. Those whom I say, 'These will go with you,' will go. But those whom I say, 'These will not go with you,' will not go." Gideon led the soldiers to a nearby stream. The sun was high, and after marching, the men were thirsty. Carefully observing, Gideon watched how each man drank water. Some knelt and brought their mouths directly to the water, drinking eagerly. Others, however, held the water to their mouths with their hands, staying alert around them. After everyone had drunk, God said to Gideon, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongues, like dogs, from those who kneel down to drink." Gideon counted them. There were 300 men who lapped the water with their hands, staying vigilant. The other 9,700 had knelt down completely to drink. Then God declared, "With the 300 men who lapped the water, I will save you and deliver Midian into your hands. Send all the others back home." Gideon obeyed. Imagine the scene. From an army of 32,000 men, only 300 soldiers remained by his side. The sounds of lively conversations dwindled, and the camp became silent. The vastness of the enemy army contrasted with the small group that stayed. The 300 men who remained were brave and confident. They not only showed vigilance while drinking water, but also demonstrated a willingness to trust Gideon and God, even in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Gideon might have felt scared by the drastic reduction of his army, but instead, he recognized God's purpose. The intention was clear: the upcoming victory would undeniably be the work of the Lord, not the result of strength or the number of soldiers. That night, God spoke to Gideon again. "Rise and go down to the Midianite camp, for I will deliver it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack them, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. After that, you will have the courage to attack." Gideon, accompanied by Purah, quietly descended to the vicinity of the enemy camp. What they saw was impressive. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the peoples of the east were scattered across the valley, numerous like locusts. Their camels were countless, like the sand by the seashore. While hiding in the shadows, Gideon heard two Midianite soldiers talking. One said, "I had a dream. A barley loaf rolled into our camp, struck the tent with such force that it flipped and collapsed." The other soldier replied, "That can only be the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has handed Midian and the entire camp over to him." Upon hearing this, Gideon's heart filled with gratitude and confidence. He prostrated himself in worship to God. The confirmation he needed came not only from God, but also from the enemy themselves. Returning to the Israelite camp, Gideon woke his 300 men and said, "Rise. The Lord has delivered the Midianite camp into our hands." With renewed enthusiasm, the 300 men prepared for battle. They did not have the strength of numbers, but they had something much more powerful: the certainty that God was with them. The reduction of the army from 32,000 to only 300 men was not an accident or poor strategy. It was an intentional act of God to show Israel and the surrounding nations that he is sovereign. The victory that was to come would be a testament to his greatness and power, making it clear that when God is in control, no obstacle is insurmountable. That night, God spoke to Gideon again. "Rise and go down to the Midianite camp, for I will deliver it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack them, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. After that, you will have the courage to attack." In this part of the story, we witness how God intentionally reduced Gideon's army to ensure that the glory of the victory belonged solely to him. The narrative teaches us about trust and obedience, showing that even when circumstances seem impossible, with God, everything is possible. It is a powerful lesson about faith, reminding us that we achieve great feats not through human strength or power, but through the divine hand that guides us. If you like what you're watching, give it a like so YouTube can continue to recommend videos like this, helping us and motivating us to continue. We appreciate every second, and may God bless you. With only 300 men by his side, Gideon faced a monumental challenge. The army of the Midianites and their allies filled the valley, comparable to a swarm of locusts in number, with camels as countless as the sand on the beach. The sight was intimidating, but Gideon was confident. God had promised victory, and now it was time to act. Gideon gathered his 300 warriors on a starry night. The air was cool, and the silence was broken only by the distant sound of the enemy camp. The men looked to Gideon, waiting for his instructions. Instead of distributing swords, spears, or shields, Gideon handed each man an empty clay jar, a torch, and a trumpet. The soldiers exchanged curious glances. A torch, a jar, and a trumpet? This was not the typical armor for battle. One of the men asked, "Gideon, how will we fight against such a large army with just this?" With a calm smile, Gideon replied, "Trust in the Lord. This is the strategy he has given us. Today, we will not win by the strength of our weapons, but by the power of God." He then explained the plan. "We will divide our group into 3 companies of 100 men each. We will surround the enemy camp in strategic positions. When we reach the posts, watch me carefully. When I blow my trumpet, all of you will blow yours at the same time. Then we will break the jars, revealing the torches, and shout together, 'The sword of the Lord and of Gideon.'" The men felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. It was a bold and unusual strategy, but Gideon's faith was contagious. They prepared, ensuring the torches were well lit inside the jars to conceal the light until the right moment. Midnight approached. The cloak of darkness enveloped the valley, and most of the enemy soldiers were asleep, confident in their numerical superiority. Gideon silently led his men to the designated positions, surrounding the enemy camp unnoticed. The silence was absolute. Hearts pounded, but not with fear, rather with anticipation. Each man held his trumpet in one hand and in the other, the jar with the hidden torch. Eyes were fixed on Gideon, awaiting the signal. Finally, at the perfect moment, Gideon raised his trumpet and blew with all his might. The sound cut through the night silence like an unexpected thunderclap. Immediately, the 300 men did the same, and the valley echoed with a powerful blast of 300 trumpets reverberating through the mountains. At the same time, they shattered the jars that concealed the torches. Suddenly, an intense light surrounded the Midianite camp. The torches glowed like fallen stars from the sky, and the sound of breaking jars sounded like the noise of an advancing army. Then, in unison, the men shouted at the top of their lungs, "The sword of the Lord and of Gideon." Inside the enemy camp, confusion was instant. The soldiers woke up startled, dazed by the sound of the trumpets and blinded by the sudden light of the torches around them. Chaos ensued. In the darkness and confusion, they could not distinguish friend from foe. Panic seized the Midianites, and they began to fight among themselves. The shadows cast by the torches amplified the illusion that they were surrounded by a gigantic army. The continuous sound of the trumpets and the echo of voices multiplied their fear. Gideon and his men remained in their positions, watching as the enemy army destroyed itself. Those who managed to escape began fleeing in disorder, running away from the battlefield. The panic was so great that there was no leadership or strategy among them. Realizing that the Midianites were retreating, Gideon sent messengers to the tribes of Ephraim and other regions, calling them to chase the fleeing enemies. The people of Israel answered the call, blocking the escape routes and capturing the Midianite leaders. The victory was complete and resounding. With a simple yet divinely inspired strategy, Gideon and his 300 men defeated an innumerable army without even brandishing a sword. Gideon's name became known throughout the land, and God's power was demonstrated unmistakably. After the battle, the Israelites gathered to celebrate. There was joy and gratitude on every face. Many approached Gideon, saying, "You will rule over us, you, your son and your grandson, for you saved us from the hands of Midian." But Gideon with humility replied, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." He recognized that the victory belonged to God and that his mission was to serve, not to seek power for himself. In this exciting part of the story, we see how Gideon, guided by God, uses an uncommon strategy to achieve victory. The narrative shows us that with faith and obedience, even the simplest actions can result in extraordinary feats. It is a powerful reminder that it is not the weapons or human strength that determine the outcome, but the trust in the divine plan. Gideon's story inspires courage and faith, showing that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, we can triumph when we follow God's direction. The night still covered the valley when Gideon and his 300 men watched the chaotic scene unfolding before their eyes. After the trumpet blasts, the breaking of the jars, and the sudden glow of the torches, the Midianite camp plunged into indescribable turmoil. Sounds echoed through the mountains, cries of panic, the clinking of drawn swords, and the thundering of disordered steps. The Midianite soldiers, abruptly awakened from sleep, were confused and disoriented. In the darkness, the shadows cast by Gideon's torches seemed to multiply the number of adversaries. Each shadow was perceived as an imminent enemy. Believing they were surrounded by a gigantic army, fear took hold of their hearts. Amid the confusion, the Midianites began to brandish their weapons indiscriminately. A soldier, believing he saw an approaching enemy, attacked without realizing it was his own comrade. Panic spread like wildfire. Tents were torn down, provisions abandoned, and commanders shouted orders that no one could understand or obey. Gideon, observing from his elevated position, understood that God was acting as he had promised. Without his men needing to raise a sword, the enemy army was destroying itself. He instructed his soldiers to maintain their positions, blowing their trumpets and holding their torches, enhancing the illusion that a vast army surrounded them. Meanwhile, some Midianites tried to organize a flight. Running in all directions, they tripped over each other, leaving behind weapons, shields, and even their camels. Fear blinded them, and the only thing they desired was to escape that terrifying situation. The first rays of sun began to appear on the horizon, dissipating the night shadows. The light revealed a scene of total disarray. Bodies of Midianites fallen by their own comrades spread across the camp. Abandoned equipment glistened with morning dew. What remained of the powerful enemy army was now a scattered and defeated group. Gideon realized it was time to act. He sent messengers to call the men from the tribes of Naphtali, Asher, and all of Manasseh to chase the fleeing Midianites. Additionally, he sent a special message to the tribe of Ephraim: descend and intercept the Midianites before they cross the Jordan River. Capture the leaders Oreb and Zeb. The men of Ephraim responded promptly to the call. They positioned themselves at the Jordan Valley and managed to capture and execute the Midianite princes Oreb and Zeb. Their heads were brought to Gideon as a sign of complete victory over the oppressors. Meanwhile, Gideon and his 300 men continued to pursue the remnants of the enemy army. Even exhausted, they did not give up. Determination in their eyes reflected the confidence that God was with them. In every village they passed, the people came out to greet them, impressed by the bravery and the achieved victory. At one point, Gideon arrived at the city of Sukkot and requested food for his weary men. However, the city's leaders, suspicious, refused to help. Have you already captured the kings of Midian, Zebah, and Zalmunna? Why should we help you? Gideon, maintaining his calm, replied, when the Lord delivers Zebah and Zalmunna into my hands, I will return here and treat you as you deserve. The same situation occurred in Penuel, where they also refused help. Undeterred, Gideon continued the pursuit. Finally, they managed to capture the Midianite kings Zebah and Zalmunna. With this, the threat of the Midianites was completely eliminated. Upon returning, Gideon fulfilled what he had promised the inhabitants of Sukkot and Penuel, showing that their lack of faith had consequences. The news of the victory spread throughout the land of Israel. The people, once oppressed and hopeless, now celebrated their freedom. They gathered and said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, for you have saved us from the hands of Midian." Gideon, however, responded with humility, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." He recognized that the victory was not the result of his own strength or leadership, but of divine intervention. In the years that followed, Israel lived in peace. The Midianites did not recover from that defeat, and the land rested for 40 years during Gideon's days. He returned to his home and lived out the rest of his days with honor. However, after Gideon's death, the people of Israel began to stray again, forgetting the Lord who had saved them. They did not remember all the good that Gideon had done for them. This final part of the story serves as a reminder of the importance of maintaining faith and gratitude, not only in times of need but also in times of abundance and peace. In this emotional conclusion of the story, we see how God granted Gideon and Israel an overwhelming victory over the Midianites without them having to fight directly. The narrative shows us the power of faith and obedience to God. Even when the situation seems impossible, when we trust in the divine plan, extraordinary things can happen. The victory over the Midianites was not just a military conquest, but also a demonstration of what can be achieved when one believes and follows God's direction. It is a story that inspires courage, faith, and the importance of recognizing that, in all things, it is the Lord who leads us to victory. After the incredible victory over the Midianites, the land of Israel experienced a revival of hope and gratitude. Gideon, now known as Jerubbaal, the one who contends with Baal, emerged as a respected and admired leader by all the people. However, his journey as a judge of Israel was just beginning, and many challenges still awaited. Gideon did not seek power or personal glory. His experience with God taught him humility and the importance of recognizing that all achievements belong to the Lord. When the people of Israel suggested that he become king, Gideon firmly refused, declaring, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." Judges 8:23. He understood that true leadership came from God, not from a man. As a judge, Gideon dedicated himself to guiding the people toward obedience and faithfulness to the Lord. He established a system of justice and leadership aimed at maintaining order and peace among the tribes of Israel. Under his leadership, the harvests prospered again, and peace reigned for 40 years, a testament to God's grace and the effectiveness of Gideon's leadership. During his time as judge, Gideon worked tirelessly to rebuild communities devastated by Midianite oppression. He encouraged agriculture, restored villages, and promoted unity among the scattered tribes of Israel. His practical actions, combined with his unwavering faith, inspired many to return to the ways of the Lord. Families that once lived in fear and scarcity now enjoyed stability and security. Children ran freely in the fields, and markets flourished again with trade and exchange of goods. Peace was palpable, and Gideon's name became synonymous with hope and liberation. Despite notable achievements, Gideon's journey as a judge was not without challenges. There were those who still clung to old idolatrous practices, and some tribes continued to stray from the ways of the Lord. Gideon faced the difficult task of balancing the need to maintain order with compassion and mercy. In a moment of great trial, a group of men from the tribe of Ephraim turned against Gideon, demanding that he lead a military campaign to eliminate the last remnants of idolatry. Gideon, aware of the importance of maintaining faithfulness to God, refused again, emphasizing that true leadership came from the Lord. After decades of faithful service, Gideon felt that his mission was coming to an end. He had fulfilled the purpose God had given him, liberating Israel from oppression and guiding the people toward renewed faith. Gideon then decided to establish a lasting covenant among the tribes of Israel to ensure that peace and faithfulness to God would be maintained for future generations. However, time passed, and Gideon grew old. He reflected on his life and the lessons learned throughout his journey. Gideon knew that true strength lay in trusting God and in the humility of recognizing that all great deeds were the result of divine intervention. Unfortunately, despite Gideon's tireless efforts, the people of Israel, after his death, began to stray again. The temptation to return to idolatrous practices and false deities became irresistible to many. Without Gideon's firm leadership and inspiring presence, the tribes fragmented, and the unity that had been achieved began to disintegrate. The memory of the victories and blessings granted by God during Gideon's reign began to fade over time. New generations did not know the stories of courage and faith that Gideon had lived, and the temptation to worship false gods resurfaced with renewed strength. Gideon's story as a judge of Israel is a powerful testimony to the importance of faithful leadership and obedience to God. He showed that even as an ordinary man with weaknesses and insecurities, he could be an instrument in God's hands to accomplish great deeds. Gideon teaches us that true leadership does not seek personal glory, but serves to guide the people toward justice and faith. However, we are also reminded of the fragility of human faith and how easily we can stray when spiritual leadership is absent. Gideon's story serves as a call for each generation to value and maintain faithfulness to God, ensuring that spiritual blessings and victories are not forgotten or lost. Gideon's journey is a lesson in courage, faith, and humility. He inspires us to trust in the Lord, even when circumstances seem insurmountable, and to recognize that with God, the weak can achieve great things. However, it also warns us about the importance of maintaining our faith and loyalty to preserve the blessings and peace that God grants us. Gideon may have lived thousands of years ago, but his lessons remain relevant today. In a world full of challenges and temptations, Gideon's story encourages us to remain steadfast in faith, to lead with integrity, and to always seek divine guidance in our lives. Gideon's journey is a story that deeply resonates in our hearts, offering valuable lessons on faith, courage, and leadership. As we reflect on his trajectory, we are reminded that, regardless of our insecurities or limitations, we can be powerful instruments in God's hands to accomplish great deeds. Gideon began his story as an ordinary man, full of doubts and fears. He was not the strongest, the bravest, or the most influential in his tribe. However, it was his unwavering faith and willingness to trust in God that transformed him into an extraordinary leader. When confronted with seemingly insurmountable challenges, Gideon chose to trust in the divine promise instead of relying on his own strength. This trust not only sustained him but also inspired his men to believe that victory was possible. Lesson: in our own lives, we face moments of uncertainty and fear. Like Gideon, we are called to trust in God, even when circumstances seem impossible. Faith gives us the strength to overcome challenges and guides us toward the purpose God has for us. Despite his victories, Gideon remained humble. When the people of Israel urged him to become king, he firmly refused, stating that the Lord was the true ruler. This humility was essential to maintaining true leadership and avoiding the temptation of personal power. Gideon understood that his position was temporary and that his mission was to serve the people and God, not to seek personal glory. Lesson: true leadership is marked by humility and service. Leading with humility allows us to positively influence others without being corrupted by power. It is a reminder that our role is to guide and inspire, always recognizing God's sovereignty in our lives. Gideon's story also teaches us about the importance of persistence. Even after facing doubts and challenges, Gideon did not give up on his mission. He continued to seek divine guidance, adjust his strategy, and lead his army with determination. His persistence ensured Israel's victory and the liberation of the people. Lesson: persistence is crucial to achieving our goals and fulfilling our purpose. Even when we face obstacles, we must keep moving forward, trusting that God is with us every step of the way. Despite Gideon's notable achievements, the story ends with a warning. After his death, the people of Israel began to stray again, forgetting the blessings and leadership that Gideon had provided. This reminds us of the fragility of human faith and the importance of maintaining our devotion and gratitude to God continuously. Lesson: maintaining faith requires constant vigilance. We cannot rest on our laurels or forget the lessons learned. We must always strive to remain faithful and thank God for His blessings, so that we can continue to prosper spiritually and socially. Gideon's story is a powerful testament that God can use anyone to fulfill His purposes, regardless of their circumstances or apparent abilities. Gideon inspires us to overcome our own insecurities, to fully trust in God, and to act with courage and determination. In a world full of challenges and uncertainties, Gideon's story encourages us to look beyond our limitations and trust in divine power. Whatever your situation, remember that you are not alone. God has a plan for your life and is ready to guide you toward victory. Like Gideon, you can be an instrument of change and hope, accomplishing great things through faith and obedience. May Gideon's story inspire you to seek a deeper relationship with God, embrace your faith with courage, and lead with humility and determination. Regardless of the challenges you face, trust that God is by your side, ready to transform your weaknesses into strengths and your doubts into conviction. Let Gideon's life be a beacon of hope and a reminder that, with God, anything is possible. Thank you for watching this far, and don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell to see more content like this and inspiring, motivational, and interesting overcoming stories. Until next time.